Mace Windu stood in the center of the Senate chamber, his lightsaber held steady as its violet blade hummed with restrained fury. The air crackled with tension, the faint sound of Coruscant's bustling cityscape muffled by the weight of the moment. Chancellor Palpatine, the architect of so much deceit and destruction, lay sprawled on the floor, his Sith lightning finally snuffed out by Mace's blade. But something inside Mace felt unmoored. The fight had been brutal, and though Palpatine's cries for mercy had been a ploy, the decision to strike him down lingered in the Jedi Master's mind. An act of justice? Perhaps. Yet it felt unlike anything he had ever done before, final, irrevocable, and deeply personal. The moment his saber pierced Palpatine's chest, silencing the Sith Lord's wheezing gasps, Mace knew he had crossed a line. Anakin Skywalker, still on his knees after his futile protests to save Palpatine, looked up in shock and horror. "What have you done?" His voice trembled, torn between disbelief and rage. Mace could feel the young Jedi's emotions roiling like a storm, but he found himself unable to respond. His body remained still, but his mind screamed at the implications of what he had just done. For years, Mace had lived by the tenets of the Jedi Order, dedicating himself to balance and control. Yet in this one act, that balance seemed to have slipped through his fingers. "You would have done the same," Mace finally muttered, his voice a low growl, harsher than he intended. Anakin stood, his own lightsaber igniting with a snap hiss, the blue glow casting his conflicted expression in stark relief. He was the key to stopping the war. "You killed him." He was a Sith. Mace snapped back, his words dripping with venom. "A threat to the galaxy and the Jedi. You would let him live to continue his schemes." Anakin's hands shook as his grip tightened on his weapon. "It wasn't your choice to make. The Jedi don't kill in cold blood." That was he stopped, but the unspoken accusation hung in the air that was the way of the Sith. Mace took a step forward, and Anakin's saber rose in defense. "Don't lecture me about choices, Skywalker. You've allowed your attachments to cloud your judgment. Your loyalty to Palpatine blinded you to the truth." The words were harsh, but Mace felt no satisfaction in saying them. In truth, he felt hollow, as though a piece of himself had been carved away when he struck down the Sith Lord. For years, Mace had prided himself on his mastery of vowed, a lightsaber form that channeled the practitioner's inner darkness into controlled aggression. But in that moment, the control felt fragile, and the darkness seemed to whisper louder than ever before. His anger at Palpatine's deceptions, at the Jedi's diminishing power, and at Anakin's obstinance all bubbled to the surface. He had always believed himself strong enough to resist those whispers, but tonight they had found their way into his actions. "You're wrong," Anakin said, his voice growing steadier. "You're no better than him. You let your anger control you." Before Mace could answer, a surge of dread swept over him. This wasn't just about Palpatine's death, it was about what it represented. The Jedi Code, the guiding principles he had followed his entire life, had been compromised. And worse, it was his hand that had done the compromising. Mace glanced down at his lightsaber, its purple blade still shimmering with power, and felt an almost tangible sense of unease. The Jedi Council would never approve of what he had done, no matter the justification. They would see it as an act of emotion, not reason. They would question whether Mace had been seduced by the very darkness he had sworn to destroy. And in truth, could he even argue otherwise? For the first time in decades, doubt crept into Mace Windu's heart, and it terrified him. His thoughts were interrupted by Anakin lunging forward, his saber aimed for a swift strike. Reflexively, Mace parried, their blades clashing with a deafening crackle. "You don't want to do this," Mace warned, but there was a coldness in his tone that belied his words. "You're the traitor," Anakin shouted, pressing his attack with raw emotion. "You betrayed the Jedi, the Republic. You betrayed all of us." The duel was fierce but brief. Mace was the superior swordsman, and though Anakin's rage fueled his strength, it left him predictable. With a quick series of strikes, Mace disarmed him, sending Anakin's saber clattering across the chamber floor. The young Jedi fell to his knees, defeated, but his expression remained defiant. Mace stared down at him, breathing heavily. His mind raced with conflicting emotions: anger at Anakin's insolence, frustration at the Jedi's failure to act sooner, and an overwhelming sense of despair at what he had become. The idea of delivering a killing blow flashed through his mind, but he quickly pushed it away, horrified that it had even occurred to him. Instead, Mace deactivated his saber and stepped back. "Leave," he said, his voice flat. "Go back to the council. Tell them what I've done." Anakin hesitated, clearly unsure whether to comply or resist further. Finally, he rose to his feet, his face a mask of anger and disappointment. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Mace alone in the chamber. As the sound of Anakin's footsteps faded, Mace slumped to his knees, his lightsaber slipping from his grasp. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a physical burden. He had always believed in the Jedi's mission to uphold peace and justice, but in killing Palpatine he had acted out of anger, not principle. He had taken a life not as a Jedi, but as something else, something darker. Mace's thoughts turned to the future. How could he face the council? How could he explain his actions, let alone justify them? Worse, what if they were right to see him as a threat? The idea of exile, of being cut off from the only life he had ever known, filled him with a sense of despair deeper than any he had felt before. For the first time in his life, Mace Windu was unsure of his place in the galaxy. He had always been a beacon of resolve and conviction, a warrior who stood unshaken in the face of darkness. But now the darkness was inside him, gnawing away at his sense of purpose. And as he knelt there, alone in the vast, empty chamber, he couldn't help but wonder whether the path he had chosen would lead him to salvation or destruction. Mace Windu remained motionless on the floor of the Senate chamber, the events replaying in his mind with agonizing clarity. Palpatine's lifeless body lay in the same spot, a grim testament to the deed that had shattered the tenuous balance of the galaxy. Despite the victory over the Sith Lord, Mace felt no triumph, only an oppressive weight that threatened to crush him. The whispers of the dark side began to stir within him, faint but insistent. They wrapped around his thoughts, exploiting every doubt, every crack in his once impenetrable resolve. "You did what was necessary," they seemed to say. "You alone had the strength to do what others could not." Yet the whispers carried with them a sinister undercurrent, a subtle push towards something far more dangerous. As the moments passed, Mace's mind spiraled deeper into self-reflection. For years, he had warned the Jedi Council about the dangers of complacency, about the subtle ways the dark side could infiltrate even the most disciplined minds. And now, here he was, a living embodiment of that warning. By striking down Palpatine in anger, he had proven that even the strongest Jedi was vulnerable. But another thought gnawed at him: what if his actions had been justified? Palpatine was a Sith, after all, the very antithesis of everything the Jedi stood for. Was it truly wrong to kill him, even in anger? The Jedi Code demanded restraint, but Mace questioned whether such ideals were practical in a galaxy teetering on the brink of chaos. If the Jedi were too weak to act decisively, perhaps he had been right to take matters into his own hands. These conflicting thoughts battled within him, and with each passing second, the darkness gained more ground. The whispers grew louder, feeding on his doubt and pain. They whispered of power, of freedom from the constraints of the Jedi Code. They told him that his strength could bring order to the galaxy, that he could finish what the Jedi had failed to accomplish. Suddenly, a presence disrupted his thoughts. Mace turned to see Yoda entering the chamber, his expression grave. The diminutive Jedi Master moved with deliberate purpose, his gaze shifting from Mace to Palpatine's body. A heavy silence filled the room before Yoda finally spoke. "Much darkness I sense in you, Master Windu," Yoda said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "Clouded, your path has become." Mace rose slowly to his feet, his expression unreadable. "I did what had to be done, Master Yoda. Palpatine was too dangerous to be left alive." Dangerous he was. "But dangerous, too, is the choice you made," Yoda replied. "A choice not made in wisdom, but in anger." Mace bristled at the criticism, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "And what would you have done? Allowed him to continue his manipulations? Watched as the galaxy fell further into chaos? I acted because no one else would." Yoda's ears drooped slightly, a sign of his deep concern. "Understand your pain, I do. But a Jedi's strength comes not from anger. In the shadow of the dark side, your actions now reside." Mace clenched his fists, his voice rising. Enough with the platitudes, Yoda. The Jedi Code has failed us. It's blinded us to the reality of this war, to the sacrifices needed to bring peace. You cling to outdated principles while the galaxy burns. Yoda regarded him with a calm that only deepened Mace's frustration. Lost you are, Mace. The dark side clouds your vision. A path of destruction this leads to. The room seemed to grow colder, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both Jedi. Mace could feel his anger bubbling just beneath the surface, threatening to consume him. Part of him wanted to lash out, to prove that his actions had been necessary, that his strength was the only thing keeping the galaxy from falling apart. But another part of him, the part that still clung to the teachings of the Jedi, felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and shame. Yoda's words cut deep, forcing Mace to confront the truth he had been avoiding, that he had allowed his emotions to control him, and in doing so, had strayed from the path of the Jedi. Yet, even as this realization dawned, Mace felt the pull of the dark side growing stronger. It offered him an escape from the crushing weight of his guilt, a way to justify his actions and seize control of the chaotic galaxy. He could hear its seductive whispers, promising him the power to fix everything, to impose order where there was none. Mace's inner turmoil was evident as he turned away from Yoda, his gaze falling once again on Palpatine's body. The Sith Lord's death had been meant to symbolize the end of tyranny, but instead, it had plunged Mace into a storm of doubt and darkness. "Leave. I cannot," Yoda said softly, as though sensing Mace's struggle. "Help you, I must." Mace turned back to face him, his expression hardening. "I don't need your help. I see things clearly now, clearer than I ever have before. The galaxy doesn't need Jedi who sit in temples, debating philosophy, while the people suffer. It needs strength. It needs strength. It needs action." Yoda's gaze sharpened, and for the first time, a hint of steel entered his voice. "Strength you seek. But strength alone, not enough it is. Guided by the dark side, your strength will destroy, not save." The words struck a chord within Mace, but he pushed the doubt aside. The darkness had taken root, and with each passing moment it grew stronger. Mace Windu, once the embodiment of Jedi discipline and control, now stood on the precipice of a terrible choice. And as he stared into Yoda's wise, sorrowful eyes, he realized that the path forward was his alone to decide. Mace Windu strode into the Jedi Council chamber, the sound of his boots echoing ominously in the vast, circular room. The members of the council, some present in person and others appearing as holograms, turned their attention to him, their expressions a mixture of confusion, concern, and caution. The chamber, once a bastion of calm deliberation, now bristled with tension as the Jedi Masters sensed the storm brewing within their colleague. Before anyone could speak, Mace cast his piercing gaze around the room. "Sidious is dead," he declared, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of defiance. "The Sith Lord who manipulated the galaxy into war, who corrupted the Senate and turned the courts against us, is no more. I struck him down before he could do further harm." The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Murmurs rippled through the council, and the holographic figures exchanged uneasy glances. Ki-Adi-Mundi leaned forward slightly, his brows furrowed. "Master Windu, this is a grave matter. Sidious was to be arrested and brought to justice, not executed." Mace's jaw tightened. And what justice would he have faced? The Senate and the courts are under his control, puppets, all of them. He would have walked free within days, his power unchecked. How many lives would have been lost because we chose to follow procedure instead of acting decisively? Yoda, seated in his usual place, studied Mace with a deep and searching gaze. "Understand we do," the threat he posed. "But in anger, did you act? Or in wisdom?" Mace took a step forward, his voice rising with conviction. "I acted because no one else would. The Jedi Code is clear: we are the guardians of peace and justice. Sidious was a cancer on the galaxy, a Sith who had manipulated his way to absolute power. His death was the only way to stop him." Obi-Wan Kenobi, seated to Yoda's right, frowned. "If what you say is true, then this is a troubling day for the Jedi Order. But to take a life in anger, Mace, that is not our way. It sets a dangerous precedent." "I wasn't acting out of anger," Mace shot back, though even as the words left his mouth, he felt the sting of self-doubt. "I acted to protect the Republic, to save countless lives. If you had seen what I saw, if you had been there, you would understand. Plo Koon's mechanical voice resonated through his mask. And what of Skywalker? He was present, was he not? What is his account of these events? Mace stiffened, the memory of Anakin's horrified expression flashing through his mind. Skywalker's judgment is compromised. His personal connection to the Chancellor clouded his ability to see the truth. He pleaded for Sidious's life, even after witnessing his atrocities firsthand. Shaak Ti spoke up, her voice measured but concerned. And yet, Master Windu, the Council would still have been the appropriate body to judge Sidious's fate. By taking matters into your own hands, you have placed yourself above the Order. Mace's eyes narrowed, his tone hardening. And if I hadn't acted, what would the Council have done? Deliberated, debated, all while Sidious continued to tighten his grip on the galaxy. The Jedi Order has spent too long clinging to its traditions, too afraid to adapt to the realities of this war. Yoda's ears drooped slightly, his voice heavy with sorrow. Compromised, the Order has been, by war and deceit. But give in to the dark side, we cannot. A thin line separates justice from vengeance. Mace exhaled sharply, struggling to contain his frustration. I didn't come here to be lectured. I came here to warn you. Sidious wasn't just a threat because he was a Sith. He had contingencies plans that go far beyond his death. That caught the Council's attention. Even Yoda straightened slightly, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. Obi-Wan was the first to speak. What kind of contingencies? Mace's expression darkened. While investigating his private records, I found evidence of a plan he called Order 66. It's a directive embedded in the clones' programming in order to eliminate all Jedi. If activated, it would mean the end of the Jedi Order. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. The gravity of Mace's words seemed to suck the air from the room, leaving the Council members visibly shaken. Kit Fisto leaned forward, his normally calm demeanor giving way to alarm. You're certain of this? Mace nodded grimly. The evidence is undeniable. Sidious didn't just create the war, he ensured it would end on his terms, whether he lived or died. If I hadn't acted, if he had escaped, Order 66 would have been his next move. Ki-Adi-Mundi's voice trembled slightly. And now, without Sidious to activate it, is the danger past? I don't know, Mace admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. But if the programming exists, it's only a matter of time before someone else finds a way to use it. We can't trust the clones, not until we've uncovered the full scope of this plan. Obi-Wan exchanged a troubled look with Yoda. The clone army has been instrumental in our fight against the Separatists. To distrust them now would leave the Republic vulnerable. And to trust them, Mace countered sharply, could spell our destruction. This is what I've been trying to tell you. The Sith aren't just warriors, they're strategists. Sidious has been playing a game we didn't even realize we were a part of. And now, we're left to pick up the pieces. Yoda leaned on his cane, his expression pensive. Much to consider there is. But rash we cannot be. Guided by the Force, our next steps must be. Mace's frustration boiled over. The Force didn't stop Sidious from rising to power. It didn't stop him from corrupting the Republic or nearly destroying the Jedi Order. We need to act, not meditate. The room fell silent again, the tension between Mace and the rest of the Council palpable. Finally, Yoda broke the silence, his voice soft but firm. Troubling. Your words are, Master Windu. Reflect you must on the choices you have made. If consumed by anger and fear, the Jedi are, victory the Sith will claim, even in death. Mace's expression hardened. I don't have time to reflect. The galaxy is falling apart, and we're sitting here debating philosophy. If the Jedi can't adapt, then maybe we don't deserve to survive. With that, Mace turned and strode out of the chamber, leaving the Council in stunned silence. His words hung in the air, a chilling reminder of how far the Jedi had fallen and how far Mace Windu himself had strayed from the path.